When I wrote my first book, The Summer House in Santorini, and even when it was published, I did not anticipate there being a sequel. I didn't even have an idea for the sequel until the book had already been out for like 6 months. And it was only because the first book sold really well that my publisher wanted me to do a sequel, and they happened to like my idea for a plotline. And thus, The Summer Wedding in Santorini was born. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Sam. I'm a romance author based in the UK, and my first book, The Summer House in Santorini, came out in 2019. My second book, The Summer Wedding in Santorini, came out last week at the time of publishing this video. But today I want to talk about the differences between writing these two books, because there were many. And a lot of that came from the fact that I didn't know I was going to be writing a sequel when I wrote this first one. So I want to talk to you about the differences in character, conflict, and process. Sorry, I tried to come up with a word for process that started with C, but there just weren't any that worked. So let's get into it. The first thing is character. Now, because I didn't know that I was going to be writing a sequel, I had two benefits. First of all, I already had the characters, and I knew that I wanted my sequel to follow the same characters, so that was kind of done. I didn't have to come up with their backstories. I didn't have to figure out their personalities, figure out their voices. Like, I kind of had that done. The challenge in writing the sequel was coming up with further character arcs. Especially in a really commercial genre, it's really easy to like take that character arc really far. Now, I'm really lucky that in the first book, I had a really external character arc. Like, yes, there were internal changes Anna goes through in the first book, and she does overcome by the end of it. However, it's very easy when you've kind of written a conclusion to that first story and what you feel like is the end of that character arc to then conceptualize what a further character arc would be. So you've essentially got three options. The first option is you can take the character arc that you did in the first book and you can extend it. So just take that same character arc to the next step. What is the next journey that you could go on to further improve or transform that character? The second thing that you could do is to invert that. And I don't mean for them to revert back to their original state, but rather to say, okay, you went on this journey to begin with, but maybe that was actually like a step in the wrong direction and now we need to correct that. Or maybe you overcompensated in this direction and now we need to correct it. This is the option that I opted for. So I took the initial character arc and I decided to kind of turn it on its head and say, okay, well maybe the way that that happened wasn't actually the best thing, so let's go in this other direction and explore this character arc further, but maybe not going further in the same direction. The third option that you have is to come up with a completely different character arc. So to say, okay, well, we resolved this part of the character arc. Now let's take a look at this completely other part of you as a character and move on from that. Now, if you've written a really believable character the first time around and they still have flaws at the end, which they should, you should be able to do that third option. You should have other things about that character that you're able to resolve. The thing that you want to avoid is basically ending up at the end of your sequel or your third book or whatever with a perfect character. And so that's why the first or second options can be really appealing, because you're able to explore that same nuance that you were exploring in the first book without making it seem like you're just taking them on like self-improvement journey after self-improvement journey. So the first thing to do is really just to understand, and maybe this is even a part of deciding that you definitely want your second book to be about the same characters. What is the further character arc that I can take these characters on? The second piece is around conflict. Some of the advice that I got that I think is really good advice is to make sure that the conflict in your second book is very different than the conflict in your first book. So if the conflict in your first book is very external, make sure that the conflict of your second book is a bit more internal, or vice versa. And the reason that you want to do this is to avoid having them just feel like rinse and repeat versions of each other, especially if you're going for options 1 or 2 under character, where you're dealing with the same character arc exploration or the same character trait that you're looking at, because then it can start to feel repetitive and it can start to feel like, what was the point of the second story? Or what was the point of the first story if you were just going to do it this way in the second story? And you don't want that. You want readers to finish the second book going, oh, it makes total sense why both of these component parts were necessary, and I'm so glad that I read both. So you want to try to make your conflict a bit different. But you also want to do that without compromising the style and the genre that you've set for yourself. So if you're in a really commercial genre like I am, like romance, you don't want to internalize the conflict too much. You still need external stuff happening. I've talked a little bit about the structural edits that I received for my second book, The Summer Wedding in Santorini, in a different video, which I'll link in the description. And in that, I talk about how I actually overcompensated on that. I did start by trying to make it a more internal conflict. I was told by beta readers that it was too internal, so I made it more external again, and then my editor said, actually now you need to bring it back internal a bit more. So it was about finding that right balance. But the nature of the conflict in the second book is very different than the nature of the conflict in the first book. And especially when you're dealing with relationships, that's going to be the case. The kinds of conflicts that couples experience early in a relationship are going to be different than the kinds of conflicts that they face later on in the relationship. The stakes are going to be different, and it's really important that you create conflicts that contrast enough with each other and feel like enough of a build on each other, and also don't feel repetitive along the way. The last part that I want to talk about is process. Now, like I said, for me, I didn't know that I was going to be writing a sequel when I finished the first book. So when I sat down to do the sequel, I had to do all of this from scratch. I had to do all of my planning of the character arcs that I wanted to create, what the conflict was going to be, how much time was going to have passed, what new people I wanted to introduce, what people from the first one I wanted to bring back. And some of that I was able to do by just writing and exploring, maybe more so than if I were doing a new project, but it doesn't mean that I could abandon planning altogether. I definitely had to make some of those decisions before I could start writing. Otherwise, I think I would have slipped back into sort of a retread of the first book. That said, what you shouldn't do, and what I definitely did do, is over planning your sequel. You do have the benefit of having that character voice already, so what you want to do is let yourself use that to kind of explore. Figure out where exactly your character is now, do that planning to figure out your starting point, but then let them have a little bit of space to kind of show you the direction they're going. Do some writing exercises, maybe some of the ones from the video I posted a couple weeks ago about starting a new project, that really just help you understand what life is like for your character at that moment. What are their worries? What are their concerns? What are the burdens they're carrying? What are the things that are occupying their mind? How are they spending their time? What are their priorities? What are their desires? What's driving them? And once you're in touch with that, that will give you a lot more answers about the direction that you want to take the story and the different plot elements that you need to introduce to create the character arc that you've identified that you want to create for your sequel. I wish that I had let my characters drive me a bit more to begin with when I was working on this book. I feel like I've ended up in a really good place, but I had to go back and undo a lot of work that had come from over planning. And I think that's because I was kind of desperate to recreate the magic of that first book. And it took me a while to realize that that's not what I needed to be doing. I needed to be creating magic in new ways because readers already experienced that one. They needed something new. And I think I've created something that I personally like even better than the first one. It definitely took me a lot of experimenting with that balance between planning and just letting the story and the characters speak for themselves in order to figure that out. And so hopefully I can offer you some advice to help prevent that from happening to you. Don't overplan your sequel. Decide on your starting point. Decide on the character arc that you want and the nature of the conflict, but then let those established characters tell you what's going to be compelling to take the first steps in that direction. I hope that's been really helpful. Obviously, this is all just from my experience, but I had a really exciting time writing both of these books, and I've gotten a really good response on both of them. So if you haven't already, go ahead and check them out. Summer House in Santorini, Summer Wedding in Santorini, both of them available now wherever you buy your books online. And let me know in the comments if you have any other questions about my writing process or about how I approached writing the sequel or anything else that you might want to see. If you're not already, be sure to hit subscribe. I've got a lot more good stuff coming your way soon, and I will see you next time. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.